Good afternoon, and welcome to the last of our pension town halls for QUFA members. We have a few in the audience, and I hope lots of people watching from home. I'm not Cameron Hunter, but I am here to introduce him. So he'll be stepping into the limelight in just a second. We brought Cameron Hunter here to talk to you today about the UPP. He's been involved in the design and development of the UPP for about 5 years now, so he knows it backwards and forwards. He's also a labor side actuary and has worked with QUFA in the past. Prior to this event, he came a couple of years ago, around 2014, to give us the lowdown on what we call the CAP plan and why it was not particularly attractive for QUFA members. And prior to that, he has consulted at various stages during bargaining. So Cam works for Eckler's and he has a great presentation style, makes things very clear. We're happy to take questions, I guess, at the end of the presentation. If you're at home, you can just text them in, type them into the Webcast platform, and we'll get them here and make sure they get asked. And if you're in the audience, well, bring them on. So without further ado, Cam Hunter's here to talk about the UPP.
Thank you. Thank you. I do have a deck here. I'm going to start off with a bit of the rationale why Labour, you and your members would support this, what's going on, and then getting into the structure of a JSPP and then the specifics of the UPP itself. So how do we get here? What was the rationale? Why does Labour support various labour groups support moving to the UPP? Well, there's been been an evolution of the broader public sector plans in Canada. And on this slide, it lists a number of not positive things that could happen to a university pension plan in Ontario. This is not a theoretical list. These are things that have happened to broader public sector plans in Canada in the last 5 to 10 years. So some plans have been converted to what we call a target plan, which means that you, the plan member, take all the risk. The actuary guesses what your contributions are going to buy in terms of pension, and if that guess isn't quite right, that pension can get adjusted up or down. That's a target plan. Some jurisdictions have legislated reductions in pensions that have been earned. Some have put caps on employer contributions. This UPP process has been a negotiated process all along. At one point, the employers had on the table a cap on their contributions, which is not something that we generally like, because in most situations, plan members are willing to pay a little bit more to keep their benefits. Having a hard cap in there takes that flexibility away. As well as moving to other different forms of cost, risk, and governance sharing. Provinces like PEI, New Brunswick, Alberta, et cetera, have imposed all of these different things on different types of plans. So this is the environment that we're in now. It's not yet in Ontario, but it's all around us, and it is happening. So what is a JSPP, a jointly sponsored pension plan? So in Ontario, a jointly sponsored pension plan is a defined term in the law, and it has certain specific meanings. In order to be a JSPP, you have to satisfy certain criteria. The first one is that it has to provide defined benefits. So I'm sure everyone listening in understands the difference between a defined benefit and a defined contribution plan, because you have both here, a combination of both. Under a JSPP, you're only a JSPP if you provide defined benefits. So this plan, the UPP, could not provide benefits other than defined benefits and remain a JSPP. They have to be jointly sponsored. That means that both Labour and the employers are involved in the governance of the plan. The most common approach is to have a 50-50 allocation, so half of the responsibility on the board is borne by the employers and the other half by Labour. There is a cost sharing. I have cost and risk sharing there. the difference between the two is cost sharing is the cost of the pension that you earn for going to work tomorrow. There's a cost associated with that. That cost is shared. That's a requirement under the UPP. It's 50-50. There's also a risk sharing. The risk sharing means that in the event that things turn out different than expected, that there is either too much money or not enough money. The risk is double-sided here, that risk under a pension plan means different than expected. So if there's, at the end of the day, we know the actuaries are going to be right over the long term. I can say that as an actuary. We expect ourselves to be right over the long term. Over short-term periods, there could be some variability. So we're going to be off by a bit. That risk is shared by the employees and, plan members and employers. In Ontario, all of the JSPPs are exempt from solvency funding, as well as enhanced going concern funding. Those funding rules are applied to single employer plans like Sears and Nortel, where the long-term viability of the employer potentially could be in question. I wouldn't be so bold as to say absolutely no university in Ontario would ever cease to exist. I suspect that if we ever got to that situation, there'd be more of a merger rather than anything else. But these funding rules are intended to protect plan members for the real situation where an employer no longer exists. Those situations, the risk of that in the university sector is exceptionally small. The funding requirements are onerous, and having onerous funding requirements for exceptionally small risks just doesn't make sense. So those funding rules are not imposed on the jointly sponsored plans. And the administration of the plan is borne by a board of trustees, not the employers. So right now, Queen's, as the employer, is also the administrator, which means it's the entity that invests the assets, that determines the amount of pensions, that makes sure the pension is paid every month. That responsibility moves from the employer to the Board of Trustees. And the Board of Trustees owes a fiduciary duty to all plan members. So the word fiduciary is a very important term in the pension world. A fiduciary is an individual or body that can make unilateral decisions that affect other people. That's a non-legal definition of that term. The Board of Trustees acts in that role. They are responsible for investing pension assets that affect all of the plan members. So they owe the plan members a fiduciary duty in the management of that. So they have to take into account the impact on all plan members for all the decisions that are taken. Pension plans, regardless of the type, are subject to numerous risks. It doesn't matter how an individual saves for retirement. It could be through a jointly sponsored plan, it could be through a single employer plan, it could be through a defined contribution plan, it could be through RSPs, etc. It doesn't really matter how the savings are taken. The structure is subject to a number of risks. The risks are all the same. There's a pot of assets that accumulate. Those assets are subject to investment risk. The individuals that are going to benefit from those assets may live longer or shorter, so there's a longevity risk there. It doesn't really matter how we save for retirement and how we provide retirement benefits. These risks apply to all the vehicles. The question then becomes, what is the most efficient way to mitigate these risks? In my view, it's better to pool a large number of individuals together for investment risks and longevity, etc. Another element of this is how the risks are shared between the participants and the sponsors. And are these risks explicitly shared or implicitly shared? These differences come into play when we have different types of plan designs. In the single employer world, in the private sector, because of these risks, most defined benefit plans are disappearing. In the public sector, they are being transformed into mechanisms where the risks are shared with employees in an explicit manner than they have in the past. And this chart tries to identify that. Where we are right now is a single employer defined benefit plan. Well, you're really a hybrid plan, but for purposes of this discussion, it's a defined benefit plan. Many of the risks are borne by the employer. The risks to you as plan members tend to be more implicit. As the cost of the pension plan goes up, it ends up as a cost to the university through their operating budget, and how they reallocate resources because of these additional strains on finances aren't directly tied to pension benefits. They're tied to how different departments or units receive funding. There's an implicit sharing. When we move up one notch to a jointly sponsored plan, there's an explicit allocation of cost, and there's more transparency on how the cost of the pension plan the risks and costs are borne and shared with plan members. There are the jointly sponsored plans in Ontario are world-renowned, world-recognized. They're called the Canadian model globally. They consist of a number of plans. They're listed here. These plans are all well-run, well-respected, and are providing benefits in a sustainable manner. That doesn't mean that they don't have their challenges and they don't go through ups and downs, but they're able to withstand them and have withstood them over the last number of years through the financial crisis in particular. I'm going to now move to the UPP, the University Pension Plan. I'm going to give a bit of an overview and then get into some specifics. The first comment I want to make is with respect to retirees. If you're currently in receipt of your pension from the Queen's Pension Plan, there is no negative impact for you. You will continue to receive your pension as you thought you were going to receive it. There is no negative impact whatsoever. The only difference is when the Queen's Plan merges into the UPP is the check or the deposit will come from the University Pension Plan, not the Queen's Pension Plan. That's the only difference. It's an administrative difference. The new pensions under the UPP will be based on the Queen's service before the effective date and the UPP service after the effective date. So right now the target effective date is July 1, 2021. So for all of your service up to July 1st, 2021, your pension benefits will be based on the Queen's Plan provisions. After July 2021, it will be based on the university pension plan service. For purposes of salaries, the final averaging salary period will be the final averaging for the whole period. So if your Queen's service stops in July 2021 and you can continue for another 8 years, those 8 years of earnings are used for purposes of determining the pension under the Queen's service period. Okay? Similarly, for the UPP service, for eligibility for early retirement in particular, your service under the Queen's plan period will be used for UPP eligibility service. Okay, so there's an integration between the two plans from that perspective. There are a couple of dates of importance. Assuming the consent process proceeds in a positive manner, the formal inception date of the plan will be January of next year, January 2020. That simply means that the government that regulates pension plans, the government will receive all of the documentation to formally set up the plan. The plan will, in essence, be dormant for about 18 months until July 2021. During that dormancy period, which is probably not the right term, but during that period, all the infrastructure will get built. The sponsor board will be in place, the board of trustees will be in place, the administration structure will be established, and the government will have time to review the submissions from the plans that will be joining the UPP to review them and approve them. Then on July 1, 2021, all of the Queen's assets and liabilities will be merged into the UPP, and the Queen's plan, for all intents and purposes, will not exist anymore. All the terms and provisions of your Queen's plans gets transferred over. They don't get lost, they don't get changed, they continue as they were. So if you have all of your career, if you retire, say, on July 1, 2022, you have all but 1 year of your career under the Queen's plan and then 1 year under the UPP. That's how your pension will be determined on that basis. Okay? And as I said a moment ago, once the plan is up and running after July 1, 2021, all pension checks will come from the UPP. So even for those that are currently retired. So some of the main design features, the first and often looked at closely is the contribution rate. This slide summarizes the contribution rate currently. I hope I have these numbers right. I should preface this as I get into some comparisons here. I am familiar with the Queen's plan, but I don't purport to be an expert on it. I did review an actual evaluation report and various documents. I hope I've got all the numbers right, and I apologize if I didn't. But what we've got here is as a comparison of the contribution rates. You can see the cost of the UPP is greater than the cost of the current Queen's plan. The UPP was designed with a 20% cost bucket. That is, it was intentionally designed to cost not more than 20%. That was agreed upon early in the process. The contribution rate is split based on earnings up to the maximum under the Canada Pension Plan and then earnings above, and I'll get into that in a minute. But the blended rate is about 10% under the UPP. You can see the numbers that we have for the Queen's Plan. Currently, it's about 7.6% for plan members, and that'll be going up to 10%. I understand that QUFA has negotiated some salary increases to offset this. Another key technical point here is the Canada Pension Plan is going to be changing. It started the process of changing. It's going to take a number of years and will be fully changed in 2025. In 2025, there'll be 2 Canada Pension Plan earnings maximums. The current one is called the Year's Maximum Pensionable Earnings, the YMPE. They're adding a new one, the year's additional maximum pensionable earnings, which is 114%. The UPP has progressively taken this into effect and will automatically move from the current maximum being the YMPE to the ultimate maximum of the YAMPE in 2025. Looking at the governance structure for the UPP will be, as we call, bicameral. There'll be 2 layers. The first layer is called a sponsor board. It will be responsible for plan design, contribution rates, funding requirements, investment strategy, that sort of thing. This layer of the board really, in essence, replaces any element of negotiations that would otherwise have taken place with respect to pension matters. It deals with all the key features. The board consists of 12 individuals, 6 appointed by the employers and 6 appointed by employees. Each side gets 1 vote. So the employers have 1 vote and Labour has 1 vote. And majority rules. That means each side has a veto. Both sides have to agree on a change in order for the change to happen. The employee side is split again. There are 3 seats that are faculty seats and 3 seats that are non-faculty union seats. UTFA has a permanent seat on the board, and the 2 other seats will rotate amongst eligible faculty associations. It's my understanding that Queen's, Guelph, and U of T will be the inaugural members of the sponsor board. The steelworkers also have a permanent seat, and the 2 non-faculty seats will be allocated based on size. That composition isn't known yet because the consent process hasn't followed its due process, and it's not entirely clear exactly which non-faculty unions are going to be involved yet. The second layer is an administrative layer. It's the Board of Trustees. This is the board that has the fiduciary duty that I spoke of earlier. And it's responsible for implementing all of the decisions of the sponsor boards and ensuring the operation of the plan. So this is the party that makes sure the assets are invested, that the pension checks are paid, that the plan complies with laws, etc. This board will be made up of 14 members. There will be an inaugural independent chair jointly appointed by the sponsors, and this will be in place for the first 7 years. There is a desire to ensure that the plan, there's a lot of work that needs to get done, and there was a desire to make sure that the plan is established properly and prudently, and the necessity to have an independent chair guide that process. There will be 7 members of this board appointed by employees, 3 by the faculty associations, 3 by the unions, and 1 by non-union employees. The non-union appointee cannot make or break a tie, and UTFA has retained the right to appoint 1 trustee. There will be six trustees appointed by employers. And the normal rules of voting typically apply to boards of trustees. Now, looking at the plan design, I'll go through this quickly, but this is a bit of detail. What I'm comparing here is the minimum guarantee benefit under the Queen's plan that also reflects the recently negotiated changes provided that the ratification vote is approved. Okay, so there are some conditions here, so this may look a little bit different from what you currently think the plan is because there were some changes recently. So the first is that every working Canadian contributes and participates in the Canada Pension Plan. As I mentioned a moment ago, the Canada Pension Plan has a maximum earnings. Because you will be working and earning a pension on the first tier of earnings, the pension that you earn on that tier is typically lower. That's the first line in this table. So the earnings up to the CPP maximum under the QPP plan is 1.4%, and that jumps to 1.6%. I'll go to the third line there. The accruals on earnings above that level is 1.8 under the QPP and 2% under the UPP. So the Queen's plan has a 1.4/1.8 plan, and the UPP has a 1.6/2% plan. So the pension that you're earning is greater. The formula results in a larger pension. Typically, we use an average final earnings. That also applies to the maximum CPP earnings base. Under the Queen's plan, it's the averaging period is the same 48 period as is used for salaries. For the UPP, it's the final 48 months. The definition of final earnings is fairly similar. It's 48 months, but there is some substantive difference, and that is under the Queen's plans, it's 48 consecutive months. Under the UPP, it does not need to be consecutive. It's the best 48 months. When you go to retire, once you've made the decision to retire, one of the key questions that you will be asked is, what happens after I die? If you have a spouse, if you don't have a spouse, your personal circumstance will all dictate what you need to do. But both plans provide a death benefit following your retirement. If you do not have a spouse, both plans provide a guaranteed pension for 10 years. What this means is that for the first 10 years after your retirement, your pension will be paid regardless of whether or not you're alive. After that, then we start asking the question, are you alive? Yes, you get the pension check. Are you alive? No, the pension stops. If you die within that 10-year period, then you can assign the death benefit to a spouse, a child, a state, a charity, whomever you want. If you have a spouse, there is a difference. Under the Queen's plan, it's in essence the same benefit, the 10-year benefit. It gets adjusted to provide 60% pension continuing to your spouse. So if you were receiving a $1,000 pension with a 10-year guarantee, what would happen is that $1,000 pension would get, say, reduced to $900. And what would happen is, in the event that your spouse outlived you, your spouse would get 60% of that. So 60% of the $900, $540, would continue to the spouse for as long as they lived. Okay? It's a little bit different under the UPP. Under the UPP, if you have a spouse, the default is a 50% pension. So in my example I just gave, if you have a $1,000 pension, then your spouse would get 50%. To make it equivalent to the 60% that would be covered under the Queen's plan, there would be a slight reduction. The amount of the reduction depends on your age and your spouse's age, but it's generally going to be about 1 or 2%. So in my example, if you had a $1,000 pension, call it a 1% reduction, your pension would be reduced by 1%. 1% of 1,000 is 10. So it would be $990 that you would receive in the event that you died. Your spouse would get 60% of $990. Okay? So it's a little bit different. Under the UPP plan, as I said, the cost of this survivor benefit varies based on age of spouse. In the event that your spouse is more than 10 years younger than you are, then there will be an additional adjustment based on the additional age difference. That's what that line is referring to. And then the last item on this slide is with respect to indexing. So indexing is simply an automatic upward adjustment to your pension when your pension is in pay. The Queen's plan pays what we call an excess interest adjustment. What happens is, in the event that the average return over 6 years exceeds 6%, then that incremental amount is used to provide this indexing component. So it's based on how well the pension fund does relative to 6%. Under the UPP, it's a completely different structure. It's what we call funded conditional indexing. So funded means that we are actually contributing towards it, so that 20% cost includes the cost of providing this indexing. It's conditional, which means that it's not automatically granted. The sponsor board will determine whether or not the plan is in the financial position to grant the indexing or not. I'll stop there for a second. There are a couple of conditions around this. The first is that for the first 7 years of the operation of the UPP, the indexing will be granted. The second aspect of this is that, as I said before, the sponsor board operates based on a majority, and there's 2 votes, so both votes have to agree to a change. The default is to grant the indexing. So in order to not grant the indexing, both parties have to agree not to grant it. So we, Labour, have to consent to not granting the indexing. So we would have to fully agree that the plan was in such a financial state that it's not in the best interest of the plan members to do it. Normal retirement. Now, I know this recently changed for Queens. So again, this is conditional upon saying yes to the UPP. I know right now it's the end, it's June 30th of following when a member attains age 65. Did I get that right? Yes. That is changing to the last day of the month in which you turn 65. So if your birthday was July 4th, your normal retirement date currently is June 30th, just before you turn age 66. Under the new rules, if you vote yes, your normal retirement date is July 31st after you turn 65, so 11 months sooner. Under the UPP, it's very consistent with what you have just changed to. It's the first of the month after age 65. In effect, what this does is, on average for everybody, it allows members to retire 6 months earlier. Early retirement. Right now, because of your structure, you can retire, I understand, at any age prior to normal retirement. Under the UPP, it's age 55. If you retire early, your pension is reduced. The pension that you'd accrued to your retirement age is reduced by 5% for each year. I've got some of the QPP details there as well. However, you also recently negotiated an early retirement benefit that is consistent with the UPP provision. And what that says is that if you are age 60 and have 80 points, and a point is either 1 year of age or 1 year of service, then you can retire with an unreduced pension. So if you started at the university at age 40, at age 60, you can retire with an unreduced pension that you've accrued to that age 60. I wanted to close off with a couple of transitional points. For retirees, as I said at the beginning, nothing changes. The only thing that changes is, instead of the university being the administrator, it is now the pension plan. The UPP will be doing that. Nothing else changes. All the terms and conditions of your pension remain unchanged. What will happen for the plan is that the current assets and liabilities will be coming into the UPP. One of the guiding principles that was determined early on in the process, that all plans had to be fully funded to come in. What that means is that in the event that any one pension plan that is not fully funded, the university, in essence, has an IOU to the UPP for the difference. That difference must be paid off over not more than 15 years, and those payments do not vary based on the experience of the UPP. So if times are good, if times are bad, it doesn't matter. Whatever that payment schedule is, it continues until all the payments are made. With respect to any gains or losses on that, actuaries, as I said, are going to be accurate in long-term, but short-term periods they may not be. In the event that there are gains and losses in the first 10 years, Queens owns those. So if there's a loss, then Queen's is responsible for making payments to eliminate the loss. That's for the first 10 years. For the second 10 years after implementation, there's a transition to the jointly sponsored model where the gains and losses are shared. So there's a 20-year transition period until this is fully implemented for the assets and liabilities that are transferred in from the Queen's plans. There are a couple of provisions or practices at Queen's that I wanted to touch on. I had said at the beginning that this process was a negotiated process between various labor groups and employers. There was a third party at the table with what I call it an invisible hand, and that's the Ontario government. The Ontario government, we need them because they need to make some changes and do some things for us to make this survive and proceed. But they also put some conditions on. One of the conditions they put on was they do not like the practice of workers receiving a pension and continuing to work. And so they have said that this practice, this employment practice, has to stop. This actually is not a pension plan issue, it's an employment issue. The pension plan, the law requires you to be able to start your pension at age 65. Whether or not you keep employed is an issue between you and your employer. But nonetheless, we understand that this is a practice at Queen's, and there's a transitional terms that have been agreed to. If you're currently receiving a pension and working, then you'll be treated as retired under the UPP, and your current arrangement will continue. If you've attained your normal retirement age at the UPP effective date, you will continue to have the option to cease accrual and commence pension while remaining employed. And that's for both the UPP and QPP service. And if you have not attained your normal retirement age at the UPP effective date, you'll only be entitled to commence receipt of your pension after terminating your employment or after December 1 in the year in which you turn age 71. The age 71 requirement is a requirement under the Income Tax Act. There is another element that, given the hybrid nature of your plan, we understand that a number of members consider taking their lump sum pension assets out of the plan at retirement in lieu of taking a pension. That option is going to be curtailed under the UPP. If you are under age 55 when you stop working for the university, you still have the right to take your lump sum out, but after age 55 you will not have that. There's a three-step transition for this feature. For the first 3 years, you will continue to have the option of taking the lump sum for both the Queen's plan and the university pension plan benefits from years 4 through 10. The Queen's pension, you could take the lump sum out, but you only get the university pension plan portability options for the university pension plan benefits. So it's split for those 4 years. After 10 years, the UPP portability option applies to all of your pension. And with that, I would gladly take questions. Am I moderating, or is there a moderator?
Just to make sure, because it's a bit complicated. So the new thing is that you have to stop working if you start getting a pension. Now, I am getting a pension now and I'm working at the same time. Do I have to stop working?
No. If you look at the second bullet on this slide, if you're in receipt of a pension and are working, this arrangement will continue.
I will be treated as retired.
Under the university pension plan.
Yeah, but am I still allowed to work?
That's up to your employer. The university plan is not going to require you to stop working.
Oh, okay. And I hope the employer that do not change their mind and say that, you just go home, get lost.
I can't speak for the employer.
And that's it. That's one risk that's not stated. Potential risk. If the employer knows, for example, that the new law is coming, saying that you cannot have a pension and salary at the same time, and the employer, even if you're still working, may say, no, the new law is... No? Oh, okay. And another question I have is, okay, your own salary, pension is not going to change. What about the pension to the spouse? Is that going to change or no?
No.
No.
The terms of the Queen's Plan continue unchanged.
Oh.
So you are receiving a pension from the Queen's Plan. Those terms and provisions are set.
Same.
They're not going to change.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, I'm going to try and put a question to you that has come to me from different sources, so I'm going to make up a situation and just clarify our understanding. And it's a question from the basis of many of our members being very close to retirement, not yet triggering their pension, and seeing, coming to their normal retirement date within a few years after the UPP comes into force. So their questions or their concerns are exactly how is my pension going to be calculated when I've got, say, the bulk of my service in QPP, and then I've got just a few years in UPP. So what I understand from you today, one important thing is your best salary is over any service in either plan, right?
Correct.
Okay. And then if you've built up a big period of service in the QPP and your money purchase pot is large, that's just preserved within the UPP, correct?
The Queen's provisions will get moved into the UPP. Whatever the Queen's rules are, they would apply for that period of time.
Right.
Yeah.
So really what changes is that from the QPP to the UPP, the minimum guarantee, the rate of accrual of minimum guarantee goes up in the UPP. So if I'm going up minimum guarantee, I'm actually going to, for those few years of service, get more back, right?
Yes, but it's not a minimum. It's not a minimum guarantee. It is the pension.
It just is the pension.
It's the pension formula.
But it's better, right?
Yes.
So the years under the QPP are calculated at those lower rates, under the UPP at
That's
the higher
correct.
rates.
The UPP accrual rates are higher than the minimum guarantee under the Queen's Plan.
Right. And then from the point of view of those of us who try to bargain offsets, you are going to see greater contribution rates, but you'll immediately have 1.5% to pensionable earnings offset, and you'll have a wage rate increase in that third year in 2021 to offset the rest of the increases that you're going to have to be making into your pension plan. So that's just me pitching that you will not see your salary go down.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
Okay. Do the restrictions on pensions being paid while working apply to working other than at your current, for example, Queen's employer? So if you got a part-time job or worked as a consultant, would these rules to pensions still apply?
No, it's working for a participating employer. So you cannot work for, if it's just the 3 universities, you couldn't work for Queen's, U of T, or Guelph and receive your pension. If you go work for some other totally unrelated entity, that's got nothing to do with this.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Any questions from the webinar attendees? Oh, okay. Sure, while we're waiting.
I was just wondering, in one of the meetings, we were told that the people like me, for example, who have retired and keep working, either they work or not, still we're going to have to vote whether we agree with the new plan. If we're not affected, why vote? Why bother?
It's not quite right. The consent process is QUFA will be voting for all QUFA members, but it's QUFA active members. That's QUFA's position, which is part of the big puzzle. What we need is 2/3 of the active members to vote yes, and not more than 1/3 of retired members and other members voting no.
Oh, I
So
see.
they're kind of like the negative of one another. We need 2/3 of those that are actively at work and contributing to the plan to vote yes. And then there can't be a meaningful opposition by all the other plan members.
The retired members, why would they vote no?
Okay. Okay.
Hi, this is just to add a bit of clarification. It's Elizabeth Hansen. I'm one of the co-chief negotiators. If you are a QUFA member but are not a currently active contributing member to the QPP, you will receive a different ratification question, one that simply asks if you wish to ratify the tentative agreement. If you are both a QUFA member and a actively contributing member to the QPP, then you get a double-barreled question that asks about the ratification of the proposed agreement and the conversion to the UPP.
Okay. At the 20-year point, when QPP risks transfer fully to the UPP, what will be the ratio of legacy plan assets liabilities to those accrued under the UPP?
Whew, that's a good question. I would say at most it would be about 50-50, and potentially less than that.
Thank you.
But that's just came from up there, just a guess.
Thank you for the clear explanations. I think I understand the pros and cons and possible changes. Would you agree that overall the benefits of the possible changes are significantly larger than the negative aspects?
Yes. In a word, yes. I think that if I go back to the observations I made at the very beginning, that these risks are real, and the benefits that you're getting from the UPP are substantive. The UPP provides a very, very good pension. It's a good pension. Yes, you're going to be contributory. Yes, it's different from the QPP, but it would move the QPP into a world of plans like these that are world-renowned, world-respected, very well-run, and most importantly, generally left alone by the government.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Okay, it looks like we don't have any more questions from people at home. If you're just busily typing and you get cut off, we will make sure your questions get answered by us or by Cam, so don't panic. And thank you very much for coming all this way.
My pleasure.
And yeah, we might send you some more questions, especially those ones where you have to pull it out of the sky, because better you than us. So thank you very much, and I'm sure everyone will join me in a round of applause.
Thank you. Thank you.